Welcome everyone to another episode of Grow Your Mind, brought to you by Grow You Now. I have my dear friend Mario Bolanos out here, and I wanted to do justice and talk about his leadership and the kind of human being that he is. So, leadership isn't about having the corner office or the biggest team. It's about what do you do in the moments that matter. When a project is failing, when your best person wants to quit, or when you have to deliver bad news. Real leaders have an operating system, a set of principles they run on instinct. He just didn't lead global technical support organizations at a multi-billion-dollar company. He forged high-performing teams in high-pressure cauldrons in the semiconductor industry. He has turned around underperforming divisions, navigated billion-dollar crises, and built a framework for leadership that puts people at the center of transformation. Mario, love to hear your introduction.
Thank you, Suraj. You were very kind with the introduction, and a good day to everyone. I'm very happy to be here, very honored to be part of the invitees, you may call it the guests in Suraj podcast and so on, right? So I'm going to share as much as I can some of the learnings and best practices that I have used throughout my career. And I'll be taking some questions from the audience at the end. And meanwhile, we can get started. Suraj, back to you.
Yeah. What's one universal truth about engineers you have found, whether they are Silicon Valley, Shanghai, or Munich? What's one common denominator, in your opinion?
Within, let's say, a global context, which is where I spend 85% or more of my career, I can tell you that one of the universal truths that really comes very clearly to my mind is those individuals that lead with clarity, that elevate with trust and purpose. And by doing that, they create a transformative culture. So the key messages here is clarity, trust, purpose, and culture. And clarity is a very, very strategic asset, especially in a global context, because clarity eliminates complexity. And many people do not really appreciate the complexity that you have when you are leading global organizations, where you're dealing with different cultures, different time zones, and on top of that, different functions. So being able to develop a clarity in your actions, in your communication, is a skill that, in my opinion, is very important. So translating that complexity into simple, actionable direction that travels across cultures is one of those universal truths that I think resonates with me very clearly. And then giving those distributed teams around the globe the clarity and autonomy so they can execute with confidence is another, I would say, strength or universal truth that I believe is important. So in summary, I think clarity is important. Clarity beats complexity, as I said. Trust basically is the currency of global leadership. You are away, you are not there physically, and getting the teams to follow your lead comes from trust. And finally, the ability to create that culture, which is the behavior alignment that shows consistency across the different organizations, is extremely important because that is what turns a strategy into operating reality.
Love it.
Clarity, trust,
Trust.
culture.
I believe that there's a lot of emphasis on competency. I think competency is given. Competency without what you mentioned is pointless. So, with that clarity, I think a lot of engineers love to talk about complex things, but it's the best engineers that can simplify complex things, and that's where clarity comes, it
Yeah,
seems like.
exactly.
What's your take on the balance between competency and clarity and trust and culture? Like, where do they all fit in together?
You say competency, clarity, and trust. All of them are extremely important, in my opinion. If I have to really prioritize one above the others, I would start with trust. Trust, I mean, it is extremely difficult to earn. It's very easy to lose it. Trust is what opens doors, moves mountains. You can be very competent, but you may have the competencies and all the skills and so on. But if you want to have others to follow you, you need more than
Hmm.
just being competent. Trust, in my opinion, is that strategic asset that sometimes we don't spend time culturing and nurturing or even understanding the power of it. But the moment you
Hmm.
discover that, you will find out that, hey, there's nothing impossible. You can really accomplish anything you want. So, out of those three, I will, even though they are important, the three of them, I will probably start with trust, and I will go with another soft skills, which is clarity, and then third, and I will go with competence. Competence,
100%.
in
Yeah.
many instances, a lot of people don't like to hear that. It's a commodity. You can find people that are equally competent, but if they don't know what are they expected to do, you don't have clarity, and they don't trust the organization, the leadership, the environment, I think they are not really very effective. So that would be my take on this.
And I think, I've been very close to your leadership and I've seen you put this into practice consistently. So, yes, we did throw numbers like $1 billion partnerships. These are real, not just million. And for that to happen, you have the battle scars to show why your operating system works. Let's
Absolutely.
continue. Two more icebreaker questions. I
Okay.
believe you have 10 or more patents to your name. Which one are you the most proudest of? What would you
Well,
like to highlight today?
yeah, that's a difficult question because each one of them has a story by itself, I guess. And if you love innovation, I think this is probably one of the things that really is a highlight in anybody's career, I would say, especially
Mhm.
engineers. So,
Mm.
but if I have to pick one, I think the name of the patent was, and I would have to translate this to the audience because it would probably don't mean anything. The lawyers normally find fancy names for the patent, but it was something along the lines of a sproutless prepackaged molding for component encapsulation. It is really exciting because the company I was working at that time, they identified five major technology gaps that they had. If we didn't address them, we would not be able to really meet the long-term
Mhm.
plans and so on. So I was lucky, or whatever you want to call it, to be appointed to lead one of those five technology areas and figure out what should we do. Should we start from scratch and develop our own technology? And that would take a lot of effort and a lot of money
Mhm.
to should we buy the technology?
Mhm.
Maybe somebody else has it. Or is there any other opportunity when perhaps we may license some core technologies available but not commercialized and so on? So after studying the different choices, I decided to go with the third one. I found a patent that was filed by European scientists, as a matter of fact. And it's the typical story of, hey, he invented this thing in his garage. But stop there. It was just a patent, never commercialized. And I saw the opportunity
Mhm.
to leverage that patent and built the piece of technology that was missing on top of it. We licensed the technology and then we started building the different blocks and pieces that were required for us to really get to where we wanted to be. So we kind of built a lot of layers, almost like an onion on top of it, in order to get there to a real commercial product that we could sell and use, which was the original task given to me. We require to change the infrastructure, the whole ecosystem. We need not only new processes, but we need the materials and the suppliers that provide the materials to
Mhm.
change, to believe in our idea. We need the equipment manufacturers also to do it. So we have to really negotiate with the whole ecosystem in order to really be able to implement this and get the benefits from that. The things that really give me energy are those within the power of teamwork, the power of cross collaboration and
Right.
multiple entities helping to make it happen. So I think the pride
Absolutely.
comes from that, something that, as a matter of fact, many people doubted and didn't think that this was going to happen eventually, turn out into something that allow us to really catch up with time, right? And have the technology gap close in a very, I would say, productive, efficient way versus trying to start from scratch and probably would have taken longer to get where we wanted to be. Mhm.
I have one last icebreaker question, and this kind of sets the tone for the hard hitting questions that follow. to unravel your operating model
Right.
for leadership, or operating system, as I like to call it. When you first became an official leader, I think you've always been the person to lead, even without a title. But when you officially first got a leadership position, what was one or two truths, or what you thought were truths back then, that later on, like today, you realize that were wrong? With great leadership, with great wisdom comes vulnerability, and you're the champion of that, and that's how you led people. So, what were one of few things that you thought were right before, but today you look back, no, it was wrong? What would you like to share so that others don't last too long in that wrong thing?
I change and evolve and
Yeah,
replace it, or something that if we have known back in the early days of
exactly.
my career, that would have significantly transformed, I guess, my journey. If I would say college days, you may say, I really discovered that the most important thing in life, at least at that time, for me was time. So I
Mm,
was maniacally focusing everything that I did based on time. Time to
mm,
me was the only thing I could never recover.
mm.
You waste time in my mind. I say, hey, I'm wasting the only thing I cannot recover, you know? So
Right,
this is
right.
the most
Uh-huh.
precious commodity for me at that time. So I was so focused on that, kind of ruled my life, you may call it, that when I started my professional career, everything to me was time-based. I had
Mm,
targets and goals, but they were measured on time. By certain
mm.
time, 2 years, 3 years, I expect I'll be doing this and that. You
I
know,
see.
most of us have those careers, goals, and stuff
Right.
like that. But you know, over a few decades, you realize the time or even speed.
Mm,
That if you measure
mm-hmm,
time and speed together,
mm-hmm.
is not as important as direction. The North Star is what is the most important one. Since you don't know what you don't know, in the
Mm-hmm.
early stages of your career, you are probably underestimating what it takes to get there. The real world comes into picture and they throw you curveballs or whatever, start facing
Mm,
challenges. And that created on me, the young Mario, that created a lot of frustrations for me. You realize that those are self imposed, self driven, self written targets.
mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah.
nothing over there that says, hey, you must do this and that. But I have to tell you that I kept the direction correctly. The North Star was always there.
Mm-hmm.
And the aha moment came when I learned I'm creating a lot of negative energy inside of me, these frustrations, but I'm still moving in the right direction. And then I started
Mm-hmm.
realizing that lesson was extremely powerful for me. I had peace of mind, I had better
Yeah.
control
Yeah.
of my life, my decisions, and I started prioritizing even personal things above other things that, as part of that long-term direction, a little pause, a little slow down the speed, you may call it, was more important, especially as you're raising a family. Priorities change
100%.
and so on. So that would be the best advice I would give to myself. The direction is
Yeah.
the most important.
When you started talking about time, it's something that you
Yeah.
cannot recover. It makes so much sense. And you kept me on the edge to understand what is the next thing that is more important than time, which is
Okay.
direction, rightfully said. More importantly, you also talked about how you can be spending so much time and chasing these things, and those negative pressures, that self-imposed pressures, can derail even the most smartest, most hardworking professional or individual. Because without that direction, you could be either going around in circles, you'd be going away from the desires that you want, you could be going away from the person that you want yourself to be. You could be taking shortcuts and paths that later on, even if you had time, you cannot undo. Let us get into the 8 hard-hitting questions that I have for you. Some of it
Okay.
is regarding what you have done so people can learn from your steps, or it could be your advice based on what you have coached other people, led other teams. Let's start with the first thing, which integrity. So the integrity test. You were once asked by a VP to remove slides from a presentation to that person's boss because they exposed chronic issues. How did you prepare for and execute a no to your direct supervisor without committing career suicide? What's the script? What can other people learn to do and hold on to integrity?
What I'm going to share, I will try not to mention any names to avoid disclosing unnecessary things. I guess the idea here is to share the learnings. A senior vice president that already I had some relationship and had worked with him together in the past called me one day to his office very unexpectedly, and I said, "What did I do?" But he said, "Look, during so many years, you told me that you didn't want to really move offshore, that you wanted to stay in headquarters, but this time you cannot say no." Then he explained to me why he wanted me to move to this offshore location. So I went there, and my task was to really turn around
Mm.
that particular organization. I managed to really get down to the findings of what was going on over there. And it was a systemic failure. There were a lot of issues that created that multiple layers of the organization were involved in. So it was something very systemic. That explained why many people that went there with the same task couldn't fix it.
Mm.
I did something very simple. I told all the managers that reported to me, this is what I'm trying to do here, transparently. I told this senior vice president, look, I have some recommendations also for you. And then he scheduled a trip over there, brought some of his staff over there. So we had a big meeting. But one of the vice presidents that reported to him, who just happened to be responsible for this operation, and had previously managed the operation. So we had the review, and then it was pretty obvious that my findings highlighted that the problems started and continued while he was responsible for that particular operation. And then he asked me, look, I don't think you should be presenting that. I think you should probably think about remove this and that. And I argued with him and said, look, this is the heart of the presentation. With this, there is no story. This is what describes the problems that we're facing. I insisted I'm not going to do it because it's against my principles. It's unethical to really not to present that story. Plus, I believe these are the right recommendations to make our company number one. Anyway, so I knew that was going to be kind of in a tense situation when I had to present this. He knew that the environment was probably tense. And then I can see people in the room that all the eyes were on me. Many of the people in the room, honestly speaking, wanted me to fail. To me, it was a validation of if you let the facts, numbers, do the talking, especially on something that you personally work on, that you really are the subject matter expert understanding the issue. Let the numbers, the data do the talking. And don't be afraid that someone else may be challenging that or what have you. Your principles, your values, integrity, trust. Those are the core foundational characteristics of leadership. Anyway, that's the story.
I have more questions. Because there's a foundational truth that you have, Mario. You've established. The battle did not start when the SVP asked you to take over that organization or way before all of that. You seem to be the kind of person who has established value system from battle scars.
Yeah.
Self-esteem. You're not the one to wait for someone else to validate that you are good at what you do. Not everyone has that luxury. So there's definitely been through childhood, through young adulthood, and over time that you have built your base, like you bathe in your truth. That allowed you to stand up with integrity. What advice do you have for viewers to establish that self-esteem, to build that value system?
The first one is not practical because it is personal. I grew up in a family wherein this was number one priority. My family name equals integrity. You are tarnishing the whole family. So from that perspective, I didn't need to have any training. So it's something that's still on us. Most companies have this in their core values. You will not find a single company say, oh, as part of our mission. So why then there are some organizations, I guess, that don't practice that? And it's sometimes it's we humans take the shortcuts. We are the ones that don't really embrace those great principles that most corporations have. That's something for us to really just reflect. But the confidence came from doing it multiple times
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
finding out that this never fails. Just you do it the first time, you hesitate, you're a little bit concerned, repercussions and all that. Then you realize, no,
Uh-huh.
this at the end wins. And then you do it once, you do it twice. Then the consistency of you practicing and working with those standards. And then I think that gives you confidence. For example, we have agreed
Mm.
that particular piece of information for the presentation. I would have lost the most precious thing that I had, which is my integrity. So then the other thing that gave me confidence is take this task. It was not my first choice, to be honest with you. I had a few other turnaround successes that I have had that he was very familiar with. And he also was very confident that I was going to have the strength and the ability to really address the issue on top of the integrity. Anyway, the first one is a personal learning. So probably we just have to listen carefully.
Don't forget what our parents taught us. Let's move on to the next one. We are doing a double take on being clear. So the clarity part. There's a high cost to ambiguity. Most teams fail not from lack of talent, but from lack of clarity. You use a tool called the one-page irreversible decision log. Why is forcing leaders to document the options they killed more important than documenting the ones they chose?
So that tool probably has different names depending on the organization, or some people use it probably without even knowing the tool. But basically, this is a tool, in my opinion, that is powerful because it forces clarity. When we talk about a specific leadership model, one of the key pillars is clarity. So this tool forces clarity. The way it forces clarity is, first of all, it has to include or describe the problem or what is what you are trying to do with it. It doesn't have to be a problem, it could be something else, but the scope of what you're focusing and what is exactly what we are solving or addressing, or so it's clear, again, clear to everyone. And more importantly, because one of the alternatives that people forget is do nothing. And then you explain very clearly why what you're trying to do is important. It's important to talk about the options, alternatives. So that's where brainstorming, getting the team together. Hey, what do you think about this? What should we do? Put all the different options, alternatives on the table, discuss them, including those that you decide that you don't want to do, the ones that you are killing, you may call it. But the key is explain and document why. Again, why is an important part of clarity, but the emotional content of why this is important is not communicated unless you elaborate on that. Many times we just stop, do this, and we don't explain the why. Where we struggle is probably the next step, which is when you move into irreversible choices. Hey guys, we discussed these are the alternatives. The problem was very clear, right? We explained why this and that. Look, with the resources that we have, for example, that's all we can do. So the reversible choices, we will not do this. And we try to do everything. In my last organization, the last organization that I managed, we used to call this the is and the is not list. The discipline of capturing, look, this is the is list. This is what we are going to do. And you communicate that to the stakeholders that you deal with, as well as your engineers and managers. So it's alignment. And then you also have a list that shows you what you will not do, which is the is not list. So it's documented. So anyone at any layer in the organization, horizontally or vertically, they really can go back to that document and say, oh, this is very clear. These are the priorities, and that's the way we use it, right? So then I think we talk about the rationale and the logic chain, and that's very important. And also, I think the success criteria is important. At the end of the day, it's just a tool, but you have to be able to measure why this is successful, why you were able to get where you wanted to be or what you wanted to do, and all of that. And it becomes like a single document, the single source of truth, you may call it. And it survives, talking about global teams, survives different time zones. Your managers, your leaders in China, for example, or in Poland or India, all of them, oh, this is the priority list. I know exactly what I need to do without calling meetings or what have you. Anyway, so I think the way we implemented it was in my last organization, which is the one that is fresher in my mind, is the priority list, the quarterly priority list that we discuss with the different stakeholders, sales, engineering, and our groups. In our opinion, what the priority list is for the quarter, do you agree? Should we change it? Should we modify it? That alignment process was important. Then we said all of this will be fully committed and you don't have to worry about that. But look, anything below this list, we cannot support. We have to wait until next quarter, or let's figure out how do we add more resources, invest, or something else.
I really like this because most emphasis is on goals, what we are committing to do. But the clarity really gets solidified because of what we are committing not to do. Let's move to the next one, which is weaponizing your calendar. You argue that a leader's calendar is the most honest statement of their priorities. How does a leader audit their own calendar to find disconnect between what they say is important and where they actually spend their time and energy?
There are different ways of doing that. When I first was not really as organized or structured, systematic doing it, when I started to really put more effort in it and created the rituals or the artifacts to really manage this in a systemic manner. But the moment for me was one time that someone came to my office and I just happened to have my calendar open. He said, "Holy cow, is that your calendar? And then why you have so many meetings?" He said, "Well, that's the way we do things over here," and so on. So this person was very interested. This was kind of a new employee that this is very different compared to the way we used to manage in this organization that he came from. Then I realized that he had a point. Why I had so many meetings, and what I was doing in those meetings, and which of those meetings probably were just a waste of time. Based on that, I realized that I had to really do something about it. The calendar is not just next week, but it's also next month and also next quarter, and potentially for the whole year. You need to have a structure to try to visualize how do you want to spend your time in whatever time frame. So you start with the key priorities, and you can start with 3, you can start with 5, or whatever the number is, but few. You cannot really do things in one day. You have to think about, hey, look, I'm going to structure my time in buckets of time. So you identify the priorities. And the thing that I remember doing that was very effective for me was I started looking at my calendar and I started correlating whether the activity aligned or not with the priorities. Also, structure the activities based on the functional activity that, in my opinion, I had to do as the leader of the team. You can come up with your own list depending on what your job is, right? So you start tracking the activity in your calendar with the priorities, and then with the functional kind of effort or activity that you have to perform. And then you do a third level of assessment over there, which is how important it is. Is it high, medium, or low to get the final outcome, which is whatever priority you define. So then I would say the panic of doing it daily, no, that doesn't work like that. Look at it on 6 weeks, 2 months kind of time frame. Say, look, how does it look, right? And then you start doing your own self-assessment. Does this look like the model that I would like to have in order to become an effective leader doing this and that? And then you start identifying, for example, hey, look, I'm spending too much time on low impact activities on the low category, or I'm not spending enough time on the top priorities, and then you start adjusting. Sounds like very structured and a lot of effort doing this. It doesn't take a lot of effort. The effort designing the system up front, and after a little while, you don't need to do it anymore. Then it's part of your daily rituals, and you protect yourself.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing.
People come and say, I want to meet with you, for example, put something in your calendar, and then started asking my assistant, hey, first of all, you manage my calendar. And if you see anything that doesn't have an objective, has no agenda, reject. If people ask why, just say, hey, look, Mario would like to know the objective and the agenda. Well, okay, they provide the objective and the agenda, and then I say, hey, look, don't you think that we can do this in a 5 minutes call? And then you start protecting yourself. Then all of a sudden, you start really gaining hours in your day that you can start reallocating to the most important priorities, right?